In the heart of the sprawling desert, where the sun scorched the earth by day and the wind whispered through canyons by night, stood the grand estate of Amarok Yaji, a man whose name commanded both respect and fear. Amarok, a descendant of proud Apache lineage, carried the weight of his ancestors in every word and gesture. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes as dark and penetrating as the night sky, he was a figure both formidable and enigmatic. Wealth had softened none of his fierceness. If anything, it had sharpened his sense of order and control. His home was a testament to his success, a stone and timber mansion perched atop a rocky plateau, overlooking a vast expanse of desert plains. From afar, it seemed like a fortress with walls that could withstand both time and trespassers. Inside, however, Amarok's touch was visible in every detail. Intricately carved wooden panels depicting Apache history, hand-woven rugs imported from distant lands, and polished silverware that gleamed in the sunlight streaming through the wide windows. It was opulent yet disciplined, much like its owner. Amarok had grown up with stories of his forefathers, warriors who had survived harsh winters and fierce battles, earning every inch of land they called their own. From them he inherited more than pride. He inherited vigilance, a mind that questioned motives, and a refusal to be vulnerable. To Amarok, trust was earned, not freely given, and those who entered his life were always under his careful scrutiny. Though his wealth afforded him comforts that many could only dream of, Amarok found little joy in frivolity. He did not host lavish parties nor seek the company of idle companions. Instead, he immersed himself in the management of his estate and the people who worked for him. He watched the rhythms of the household as a general might oversee his troops, every step measured, every task scrutinized. There was a meticulousness to his governance, a relentless pursuit of perfection that left little room for error or for betrayal. It was in this setting that the maid, Ayana, entered his life. Amarok had employed many over the years, yet he remained wary of strangers, even those who bore the title of help. His eyes, sharp and discerning, rarely missed a detail, and he observed the slightest shift in demeanor or hesitation in speech. It was a trait that had kept him safe and his wealth intact, yet it also kept him isolated, for few dared approach him without fear. Despite his stern exterior, Amarok was not without emotion. Beneath the armor of suspicion and control, there was a part of him that yearned for loyalty, for honesty untainted by personal gain. It was this desire, buried deep beneath layers of caution, that would soon lead him to test the one person who had captured his attention, not through charm or beauty, but through the quiet dignity and dedication she displayed in her work. He had noticed Ayana from the first day she stepped into the estate. Her movements were careful, her attention to detail unerring, yet there was something else, a calmness, a steadiness, a warmth that seemed out of place in the cold, calculating environment he cultivated. She was expecting a child, and though Amarok was aware of her situation, he found it difficult to reconcile such vulnerability with the world he had built. In his mind, a person in her position could easily falter, be swayed, or act out of desperation, and so, Amarok Yaji, the proud Apache man who had survived life on his own terms, began to entertain a thought that would set the stage for a profound revelation. Could loyalty truly exist where suspicion lingered? Could human kindness endure even when tested by doubt? The answers, he knew, would come not through observation alone, but through action, an experiment that he, with all his cunning and caution, would carefully orchestrate. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the estate, Amarok stood by the window, eyes fixed on the desert beyond. The wind carried the scent of sage and sand, and in that stillness he felt a stirring of anticipation. The stage was set, and he would soon see whether the quiet strength he observed in Ayana was genuine or merely a facade. Ayana moved quietly through the corridors of the estate, each step careful and measured, as if the polished floors themselves demanded respect. She had been employed by Amarok Yaji for several months now, and in that time, she had learned the rhythms of the mansion, the subtle shift of shadows as the sun moved across the rooms, the soft creak of the stairs beneath a heavy foot, the way silence could speak louder than words. Though her life was far from luxurious, she carried herself with dignity, her movements a delicate blend of efficiency and grace. Ayana was young, in the gentle bloom of her 20s, with dark hair that fell in loose waves down her back and eyes that held a quiet intelligence. But it was her demeanor, more than her appearance, that left an impression. She did not demand attention, nor did she shrink from responsibility. She worked tirelessly, tending to the estate's myriad tasks, polishing silverware, sweeping floors, preparing meals, and ensuring that every corner reflected the meticulous standards Amarok had set. Yet she did so with patience, even warmth, a rare quality in a household governed by such rigid discipline. Her pregnancy, now evident in the curve of her belly, had brought a new layer to her life. There were moments when exhaustion weighed heavily on her, when the heaviness of carrying another life seemed almost unbearable, but she never let it hinder her work. Each morning she rose before dawn, her small frame braving the chill of early desert winds, and attended to the chores without complaint. She moved with an unspoken purpose, a quiet strength that suggested she was not merely surviving, but thriving in her own way. Despite the demanding nature of her work, Ayana found solace in simple routines. She cherished the small joys, the scent of freshly baked bread, the warmth of the sun on her face, and the fleeting moments of peace when she could sit and watch the desert stretch endlessly beyond the estate walls. She had grown up in a modest village where life was often harsh and uncertain. Those early years had taught her resilience and the importance of self-reliance. Yet, there was also a generosity in her spirit, a willingness to give care and attention to others, even when her own needs were pressing. From the moment she had arrived at Amarok's estate, she had sensed the intensity of her employer's gaze. Amarok was a man whose presence filled a room without effort, whose silence could unsettle even the most confident. But Ayana did not shy away. Instead, she approached her duties with steadfast composure, aware that respect and integrity were her shields in this imposing household. She had no illusions about Amarok's temper or his high standards. She simply understood that navigating his world required both awareness and tact. It was not fear that guided her, but careful observation. She noted the subtleties of his moods, the cadence of his speech, and the small telling gestures that revealed more than words ever could. In return, Amarok seemed intrigued by her, though whether this intrigue was suspicion, admiration, or something else entirely remained unclear. She had learned to tread lightly, to act with honesty and humility, and to let her actions speak louder than any words she could offer. Ayana's life was not without its quiet moments of reflection. She often thought of the child growing within her, imagining the future with both hope and trepidation. She wondered about the world her baby would inherit, the lessons she would teach, and the strength she would need to survive. But she never allowed her concerns to interfere with her responsibilities. In her mind, care and diligence were not optional. They were essential. And it was precisely these qualities that, unknowingly, were beginning to test Amarok in ways neither of them could yet foresee. As she moved from room to room, tending to the tasks at hand, a sense of purpose radiated from her very being. She was not merely a servant performing duties for her employer. She was a guardian of her own integrity, a quiet force navigating a world of suspicion and authority. And though she did not yet know it, the choices she would make in the coming hours would challenge the very nature of Amarok Yazi's understanding of loyalty, trust, and human kindness. Amarok Yazi sat alone in the study, the fading light of the desert sunset casting long shadows across the room. His gaze rested on the lines of the estate before him, but his mind was elsewhere, circling a single thought like a hawk hunting prey. Ayana, the maid, had proven herself diligent, careful, and outwardly trustworthy. Yet Amarok's instincts, honed over a lifetime of caution, stirred a quiet but persistent unease. He had learned from his ancestors that appearances could deceive, that even the most loyal could falter under temptation or need. It began with small things, seemingly inconsequential. A tray left slightly out of place, a folded cloth that seemed too neat, a glance that lingered just a fraction longer than expected. Nothing concrete, nothing overt, but the man's mind, sharp and unforgiving, began to weave these observations into patterns that may or may not exist. He questioned her motives. Did she act with genuine care, or was it a performance designed to gain favor or advantage? Was her pregnancy a shield, or a bargaining tool in the subtle games of trust and manipulation that governed human interaction? Amarok rubbed his chin thoughtfully. He did not believe in confronting someone based purely on suspicion. That was beneath him. No, if he were to understand the truth of Ayana's character, he would need evidence, something undeniable. He needed to see her in a moment of choice, unguarded, to determine whether her loyalty was genuine or merely a carefully constructed facade. The idea took root slowly, a plan forming in the quiet recesses of his mind. If he could observe her without her knowing, without the pressure of his presence influencing her actions, he might uncover the truth. It was a test, subtle yet absolute, designed not to punish but to reveal. Amarok had conducted similar mental exercises with business associates, with traders and employees, and rarely had he been wrong. Yet this was different. This was personal. He thought of the times he had watched her work, how she moved through the estate with quiet precision, how she seemed to anticipate needs before they were spoken, and how, despite the fatigue that must weigh on her as a pregnant woman, she never faltered. Could such dedication be purely transactional, or was it something deeper? He could not yet decide, and that indecision gnawed at him. The plan, once conceived, seemed both simple and cunning. Amarok would pretend to sleep at a carefully chosen moment, a time when Ayanna might assume he was resting or indisposed. He would observe her without revealing himself, watching for even the smallest sign of dishonesty, negligence, or disrespect. Every motion, every glance, every decision she made in his absence, or what she thought was his absence, would be scrutinized. Yet, as he contemplated the test, a strange sensation tugged at him. Part of him recoiled at the idea of doubting someone who had shown nothing but integrity. Another part felt a thrill at the prospect of finally discerning the truth, a chance to pierce the veil of appearances and see the soul of a person laid bare. Amarok had always been a man of control, of certainty, and this uncertainty, this fragile tension between suspicion and trust, fascinated him more than he cared to admit. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the horizon as night began to settle over the desert. Somewhere in the estate, Ayanna moved with quiet purpose, unaware that her every action was about to be tested. Amarok's thoughts drifted briefly to the child she carried, a new life she was nurturing, and he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, an echo of vulnerability, mirrored faintly in himself. The stage was nearly set. The questions had been planted, and as Amarok Yaji prepared to test the maid, neither he nor Ayanna could have imagined how profoundly the outcome would challenge everything he believed about loyalty, trust, and human kindness. The night settled over the estate like a heavy blanket, and the desert beyond seemed to hold its breath. Inside the grand house, Amarok Yaji prepared to put his plan into motion. He had chosen the hour carefully, late enough that the day's tasks had wound down, when Ayanna would feel a fleeting sense of privacy and might let her guard slip, but not so late that exhaustion would mask her true nature. In the master bedroom, Amarok arranged himself on the large bed. He lay perfectly still, controlling every muscle, slowing his breathing until it resembled the rhythm of sleep. Every line of his body communicated relaxation, every inch of him a convincing illusion. The trick would require patience and discipline. He knew that even a slight movement could betray the ruse. Amarok had faced battles, negotiations, and betrayals in his life. But this test, a simple observation of a single person, demanded a precision and subtlety that rivaled any challenge he had ever faced. From his position, he could see the doorway, the hallway, and part of the common areas without being noticed. His plan was not malicious. He did not intend to shame or punish. He merely wanted to know the truth. Could loyalty endure when suspicion lingered? Could kindness remain untainted even under scrutiny? Amarok did not voice these thoughts aloud. There was no one to hear them. But internally, the questions weighed heavily, gnawing at his pride and stirring his curiosity. Meanwhile, in another part of the house, Ayanna moved about her evening tasks with quiet diligence. She washed dishes, wiped counters, and folded linens, her movements fluid and deliberate. Her mind was focused on the comfort of the household and the child she carried, not on Amarok's presence, or the absence that she would soon suspect. She had sensed his watchful eyes many times, yet she had never faltered, never acted dishonestly. In her way, she trusted that her integrity would be recognized even if unspoken. Amarok's eyes, sharp even beneath the guise of sleep, followed her. Every step she took, every motion of her hands was logged silently in his mind. He watched for hesitation, for signs of impatience, for any hint that her loyalty was performative. His heart beat a little faster, a tension he had not anticipated, as if the outcome of this simple observation carried more weight than any battle he had fought. Minutes passed like hours. The quiet creaks of the house, the settling of the wood, the distant howl of the wind were amplified in the silence. Amarok's mind wandered briefly, imagining the possibilities. What if she stole something, even inadvertently? What if she treated him with subtle disrespect? And then, almost against his better judgment, he allowed himself to hope that she would prove him wrong. That hope, fragile as it was, made the weight almost unbearable. Ayana, still unaware of the silent observer, finally approached the bed to adjust the blankets. She paused, sensing a subtle shift in the room, a presence that was both familiar and enigmatic. Her hands, gentle yet decisive, straightened the covers over Amarok without hesitation. In a soft, almost instinctive murmur, she spoke to him, not as a maid to her employer, but as a caretaker to someone she believed to be resting. "Sleep well, sir. Stay warm." Amarok felt a strange constriction in his chest, a mix of disbelief and awe. This was not the betrayal he had feared. This was not deceit or manipulation. Every action, every gesture, every word she spoke reinforced a single truth. Her loyalty and kindness were real. He remained frozen in the guise of sleep, unsure whether to reveal himself or continue the test. The weight of his pride, his suspicion, and the dawning realization of her integrity pressed upon him all at once. The plan he had devised so meticulously had produced an outcome far beyond what he had expected, an outcome that would leave him questioning everything he thought he knew about human nature. Amarok lay still, feigning sleep, yet every fiber of his being was alert. He had seen countless people in his life, but none had moved with the quiet, unwavering integrity that Ayana now displayed. Her hands smoothed the blankets over him with a tenderness that seemed almost instinctive, and the soft words she whispered, words meant for comfort, not gain, pierced through the layers of suspicion he had built around himself. For a moment he felt a jolt of disbelief. He had expected hesitation, slyness, or some subtle form of deceit. Perhaps a glance to see if he was watching. Perhaps a small act of manipulation to benefit herself. But there was nothing. No hesitation, no self-interest, no trace of duplicity. She had acted purely out of care and concern, guided by nothing more than her moral compass and the simple desire to do right. His chest tightened as a wave of conflicting emotions washed over him. Awe, shame, admiration, and an almost unnameable vulnerability. Amarok had spent a lifetime shielding himself from the unpredictability of human hearts, trusting few and doubting all. Yet here was a woman, one he had deemed vulnerable, one he had doubted, demonstrating a strength of character that dwarfed his own. He watched silently, frozen, as Ayana adjusted the pillow beneath his head and quietly stepped back, her eyes briefly scanning the room before she resumed her other tasks. She moved with the same diligence she had always displayed, yet there was a grace in her actions now magnified by the knowledge that she had acted without the slightest awareness of being observed. Her kindness was pure, uncalculated, and utterly disarming. Amarok's mind raced. How had he, a man who prided himself on discernment and insight, so completely misjudged her? His suspicion, his carefully laid plan, his tests. All of it seemed trivial in comparison to the truth now undeniable before him. Ayana's loyalty and compassion were genuine. He felt a sudden, almost overwhelming need to acknowledge his misjudgment, yet the pride and reserve that had defined him for so long held him silent, at least for the moment. Time seemed suspended. Every heartbeat echoed in the quiet room, every breath measured and deliberate. Amarok understood with a clarity that startled him that this was a pivotal moment, not merely in his understanding of Ayana, but in his own perception of trust and human connection. He had expected the test to reveal her motives, to confirm his suspicions, but instead, it revealed something far greater, the possibility of goodness untainted by circumstance, the strength of character that did not require recognition or reward. A tear, unexpected and unbidden, welled in Amarok's eye. He blinked quickly, hoping it would go unnoticed, but the sensation of awe and humility remained, settling over him like a quiet storm. For the first time in years, he felt the walls around his heart soften, if only slightly, as the weight of his assumptions gave way to the undeniable truth before him. In that silent, suspended moment, Amarok made a quiet inward vow. He would no longer let suspicion dictate his view of those who served him. He would no longer assume duplicity where loyalty and care existed. And perhaps most importantly, he would learn to recognize the quiet strength in those who moved through life not seeking power or gain, but simply doing what was right. Ayana, completely unaware of the transformation she had sparked, continued her duties with the same quiet dedication. Amarok remained still, feigning sleep a moment longer, not out of caution but out of reverence for the lesson she had unknowingly imparted. The man who had entered the room with doubt and control would not leave it unchanged. The quiet of the house was absolute. Amarok still lay motionless, heart pounding in a way he had not felt in years. He had seen her act, and yet he could not move, could not speak. Part of him feared that if he revealed himself too soon, he might shatter the purity of the moment. There was a strange, almost sacred quality to Ayana's actions, a demonstration of trust and care so complete that it demanded patience and restraint. Meanwhile, Ayana sensed that something was different in the room. Though she could not put her finger on it, an almost imperceptible tension hung in the air, like the quiet hum before a storm. She paused in her tasks, her eyes flicking toward the bed, her instincts whispering that Amarok's presence was more than simply resting. Yet she did not act on this suspicion with alarm. Years of navigating the moods of her employer had taught her that caution. Respect and humility were often more revealing than confrontation. Instead, she moved with deliberate calm, continuing her chores while keeping an unobtrusive awareness of the space around her. She adjusted a chair, folded linens, and arranged utensils, all with the same meticulous care she had always shown. Each movement was purposeful yet gentle, a reflection of her moral center and her dedication to her work. Even in the subtle moments when she sensed his gaze, or what she now thought might be a presence, she did not falter. She did not speak. She did not rush. She simply acted with integrity, allowing her character to guide her. Amarok's eyes, still half hidden behind the mask of sleep, followed her every action. He noticed the smallest details, the way she paused before bending to lift a tray, the careful alignment of items on the counter, the unhurried rhythm of her hands as she smoothed the folds of a blanket. Every motion was deliberate, precise, and devoid of self-interest. His suspicion, carefully built over weeks, began to crumble. For the first time, he realized that loyalty was not always loud, that honesty did not need to announce itself, and that true kindness often existed in quiet, unobserved acts. Ayana, sensing a subtle shift in the air, thought she might be imagining it. Perhaps Amarok had returned to his room earlier than she expected, or perhaps her mind was merely alert to the rhythms of the household. Still, she did not pause in her work. There was an instinctual understanding guiding her, to act with grace, patience, and dignity. She was unaware that every choice, every careful motion, was being recorded in the mind of a man who had long believed vigilance was the only way to protect himself from deceit. Amarok remained frozen, both physically and emotionally, as he absorbed the weight of her actions. The fear that had prompted his test, the fear that loyalty might be conditional, that kindness might mask ulterior motives, was now replaced by something he had not anticipated: admiration and humility. He understood in that suspended moment that Ayana's integrity was absolute. It needed no validation, no scrutiny, and no acknowledgement. She acted rightly because she was inherently good, not because she sought approval or reward. And yet, despite the certainty he now felt, Amarok did not move. He did not speak. He simply watched, learning a lesson that no strategy, no test, and no carefully calculated observation could have taught him alone. In the quiet stillness, a new understanding began to form. The realization that trust and kindness, when genuine, could endure even the most scrutinizing gaze. Ayana, continuing her duties, remained unaware of the silent revelation she had prompted. Yet her actions had set the stage for a profound transformation, not just in Amarok's perception of her, but in his understanding of himself and the way he related to the world. Amarok Yazi remained still, pretending to sleep. Yet inside, his thoughts were racing with a force he had not felt in years. Every action of Ayana replayed in his mind, like a silent testimony of her character. The way she had carefully smoothed the blanket over him, the softness in her voice as she murmured words of care, and the deliberate care she took in continuing her chores. Each detail revealed an integrity that struck him to his core. He had built his life on vigilance, on observing people for signs of weakness or deceit. For decades, suspicion had been his shield, his method of navigating a world that often rewarded cunning over kindness. Yet in this quiet room, surrounded by the soft glow of lanterns and the settling calm of the estate, he realized that all his tests, All his strategies were inadequate measures of the human heart. Ayana had passed the ultimate test, not because he had devised one, but because she acted naturally, without expectation or guile. A wave of humility washed over him, unsettling in its intensity. He felt the weight of every wrong assumption he had ever made, every glance he had interpreted as deceitful, every relationship strained by his mistrust. How many times had he misjudged loyalty? How many times had he let suspicion cloud his judgment? The answers were too many to count, yet none were as poignant as this moment when he witnessed a truth so undeniable it left him momentarily paralyzed. He reflected on the life Ayana carried within her. Her pregnancy added a layer of vulnerability, yet she moved with a strength that dwarfed his own. She balanced diligence and care, her every motion guided by instinct and morality rather than calculation. Amarok had thought that someone in her position might falter under temptation or desperation, but here she was, steadfast, unflinching, and pure. The contrast between his expectations and reality was so stark it left him breathless. In that suspended silence, Amarok felt a strange tenderness he had long denied himself. He realized that trust, when genuine, could not be forced or tested. It could only be recognized and honored. The lesson was both simple and profound. Integrity is revealed not through scrutiny, but through the quiet choices made when no one is watching. Ayana's actions had shattered his preconceived notions, leaving him both humbled and enlightened. As he continued to observe her, Amarok began to sense another truth. He had underestimated the power of compassion. He had ruled his household with authority and discipline, but he had rarely considered the subtle ways care and empathy could influence others. Here was someone whose actions were guided by kindness, and in return, she had inspired a transformation in him, a softening of a heart long fortified against the world. Ayana, unaware of the impact she had made, moved gracefully through the room, her attention fully on her duties. She had no desire to impress, no intent to manipulate, and no awareness that she was teaching a man to trust again. Yet each of her movements, each act of quiet dedication, drew Amarok deeper into reflection, forcing him to confront not only her virtue but his own failings. By the time she paused to rest briefly, placing her hands gently on her belly, Amarok knew that the test had concluded, not because he had learned something new about her, but because he had learned something new about himself. In her unwavering honesty and care, he saw a mirror of the qualities he had long denied, a reminder that trust and respect could exist without calculation or control. And in that quiet, profound moment, Amarok Yaji, the proud Apache man who had once relied solely on suspicion to navigate life, felt the first real stirring of something he had long suppressed: hope. The room was bathed in the soft glow of lantern light, shadows dancing gently on the walls. Amarok Yaji remained motionless beneath the blankets, his body still feigning sleep, but inside every nerve was alive. He had watched countless people in his life, judged their intentions, and assessed their honesty, but never had he witnessed something like this. Ayana approached the bed once more, carrying a small bowl of water and a damp cloth. Her steps were deliberate yet gentle, her expression calm and serene. Without hesitation, she placed the bowl on the nightstand and dipped the cloth into it, wringing it carefully before running it over Amarok's forehead and hands, checking for any sign of discomfort. She did this not out of obligation, but from a quiet instinct to care, as if it were a natural extension of who she was. She adjusted the blankets again, ensuring that he was warm, and then, without a word, settled into a nearby chair to rest briefly. Her eyes, bright and steady, carried no hint of scheming or manipulation, no trace of self-interest. Every gesture, every movement radiated sincerity and compassion. Amarok felt an almost paralyzing awe. The careful plan he had concocted, the test, the observation, the watchful scrutiny, had yielded no deception, no betrayal. Only this, pure, uncalculated kindness. For a moment, Amarok felt his entire worldview shift. The walls he had built around his heart, the suspicions that had guided his every interaction, began to crumble. He realized that his doubts had been unnecessary, even harmful, and that her actions were a mirror reflecting what he had long denied himself: trust, loyalty, and empathy. He had believed vigilance was the only way to survive, but here was living proof that integrity could exist without reward or recognition. He wanted to speak, to acknowledge the lesson she had unknowingly imparted, but the words caught in his throat. There was something sacred about the moment, a purity that demanded silence and reverence. He remained frozen beneath the covers, not out of fear but in awe, watching her continue her tasks with the same unwavering dedication. The realization hit him with a profound force. Ayana's loyalty was not performative. It was not influenced by his wealth, his authority, or even the potential consequences of his scrutiny. She acted rightly because it was who she was, because her heart was guided by a moral compass that required neither observation nor reward. Every small act, the smoothing of the blankets, the gentle words, the careful tending to the room, spoke louder than any declaration could. Amarok's mind raced with a mixture of humility and astonishment. He had expected to test her, to confirm or dispel his suspicions, but instead, she had revealed a deeper truth, one that transcended fear, control, or power. He was left frozen not by fear or anger, but by admiration, by the profound realization that goodness could exist, unshaken even in the face of doubt. Ayana, unaware of the silent observation she had endured, stood and prepared to leave the room, her duties completed with the same grace and care that had defined her every action. Amarok remained still, his heart pounding with gratitude and newfound respect. He had intended to test her, yet it was he who had been tested, and in that test, he had learned the most important lesson of all. In the quiet of the night, Amarok Yaji felt a stirring in his soul that he had not known for years, a recognition of integrity, a respect for true character, and an awakening to the possibility of trust. For the first time, he understood that loyalty and kindness, when genuine, were unshakable, and he knew that his life and his view of those around him would never be the same again. Morning light crept through the tall windows of the estate, casting a warm glow across the room. Amarok Yaji finally stirred, not because he needed to wake, but because the night's revelation had left him restless with thought. He had spent hours pretending to sleep, observing Ayana in silence, and in that time, something profound had shifted within him. He rose from the bed slowly, each movement deliberate as if to absorb the weight of the lesson fully. The realization he carried was not fleeting. It was etched into his consciousness. He had misjudged her. His suspicions, the meticulous test he had devised, and the doubts that had guided him for so long, all of it was unnecessary. Ayana's loyalty, her integrity, and her kindness were real. They had never wavered, even under scrutiny. Amarok walked through the quiet halls of his home, reflecting on his own life and choices. How many times had he doubted those around him? How often had he allowed suspicion to cloud his judgment, to prevent him from seeing the truth of people's hearts? The questions pressed upon him like a weight he could no longer ignore. For all his wealth and status, he realized that the most valuable lesson had come from someone far humbler than himself, a maid who had acted without expectation, without calculation, and without fear. He thought of the small acts she had performed, smoothing the blankets, murmuring comforting words, tending to the room with care. Each gesture had been simple, almost ordinary, but when seen through the lens of intention, they revealed extraordinary character. Amarok felt a mixture of awe and shame, awe at her selflessness and shame at the mistrust he had harbored. He had believed himself wise, yet here was a woman who had silently outshone him in virtue and insight. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel vulnerability, a sensation long foreign to him. He understood that trust was not weakness, and that human goodness was not something to be tested or controlled. It was something to be recognized and honored. Ayana had shown him that the strongest people were not always the ones who commanded respect through power or fear, but those who acted rightly when no one was watching. Amarok paused by a window, gazing out at the desert stretching endlessly beyond the estate. The sun illuminated the vast expanse, and in that light, he saw the metaphor for his own life. A world filled with people whose intentions might be unseen, whose deeds might go unnoticed, yet whose character could shape the hearts of those willing to see. He felt a stirring of humility, of introspection, and of hope. A hope that perhaps he could learn to navigate life not only with vigilance, but with trust, understanding, and respect. As he reflected, he made a quiet promise to himself, to approach others with less suspicion, to recognize integrity when it appeared, and to value the strength of character over the appearance of perfection. He knew it would not be easy. Decades of caution and mistrust could not vanish overnight. But the seed of change had been planted, nourished by the simple, profound acts of someone who had moved through life with honesty and care. Yaji, the proud Apache man, had intended to test another's loyalty, but in truth, it was he who had been tested. And in that realization, he felt something extraordinary, a softening of the heart, the beginning of trust, and a newfound respect for the quiet strength of human goodness. By midday, the estate hummed with its usual rhythm, but something intangible had shifted. Yaji walked through the halls with a lightness he had not felt in years. The weight of suspicion and the constant need to control had been replaced by a quiet awareness, a newfound respect for the integrity and kindness he had once doubted. Ayana moved gracefully through her duties, unaware that the man she had served with unwavering care had been silently observing her all along. Yet the effect of her actions lingered, shaping Amarok's perception and guiding his next steps. For the first time, he approached her not as an employer testing a subordinate, but as a man seeking to understand and honor the heart before him. He called her to the main hall, his voice steady but warm, free of the usual authority-laden tone. Ayana looked up, curious but composed, meeting his gaze with the same quiet dignity she had always carried. Amarok spoke simply, yet with sincerity. "Ayana, I owe you an apology for my doubt for the test and for the mistrust I let guide me. I see now that your integrity and care are genuine. I misjudged you, and I am grateful for the lesson you've shown me." For a moment, Ayana's eyes widened in surprise. She had never sought praise or recognition, yet she understood the depth of his words. In that exchange, a bridge was built between them, not of obligation but of mutual respect and understanding. Amarok realized that trust, once earned and recognized, could foster a bond far stronger than fear or suspicion ever could. From that day forward, the atmosphere of the estate shifted. Amarok allowed himself to delegate with confidence, to rely on others without constant oversight, and to appreciate the quiet strength of those around him. Ayana continued her work with the same dedication, but now there was a subtle acknowledgement between them, a shared understanding that honesty, kindness, and loyalty had the power to transform even the hardest hearts. The child she carried became a symbol of hope and renewal, a living reminder that life and goodness could flourish even in the midst of doubt. Amarok found himself thinking less about control and more about connection, learning that strength was not always measured by vigilance, but by the ability to trust and respect others. As the sun set over the desert once more, Amarok stood by the window watching the light stretch across the sands. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for his wealth, his estate, or his power, but for the unexpected teacher who had entered his life quietly without fanfare and shown him the value of trust, integrity, and compassion. In Ayana's unwavering actions, Amarok saw a mirror of what humanity could be at its best. And in that realization, he found a freedom he had long denied himself, the freedom to trust, to respect, and to embrace the quiet, enduring strength of goodness. The story ended not with drama or confrontation, but with understanding, humility, and a bond built on mutual respect, a bond that would guide both their lives in ways neither had anticipated, yet both would cherish forever.